Welcome back to the channel. Part 2 of setting up our table saw with our router base. In part 1 you saw that we made the right extend table and we're making this mobile base. So I made the mobile base and started with 4 casters as you saw in the first video, and I put the saw on it and decided it wasn't stable enough. So you see here I'm adding another plate. That's that 5th plate. I'm going to put another caster that's going to go underneath the table saw and help support it. I may even do 2 casters there with a total of 4 under the saw and 2 on the outfeed table, but I'm just not quite sure. Like I said before, our floor in our shop is uneven at best, and to have that many casters, that many points of contact against the floor, I'm afraid it may not just work out in a lot of places. But we're going to play around with it and see. So this is just me bolting on that 5th caster, and it actually created or allowed for a lot of stability, and I think it's going to work out okay, but we'll just see. Here I'm just looking at this base now, and I created a problem for myself. This shelf that was supposed to sit in there nice and flat now has these 2 bolts coming up from it from the caster. I thought, that's not a big deal. I could go about this a couple different ways. I can't really cut those off and make it smooth, so I can either notch the shelf or just mark it and drill a couple holes for those bolts to come up through the bottom of that shelf. And that's what I ended up doing. You can see me doing that here. So here I am attempting to put this thing back up on its base. This unisaw, the way you see it just like that, weighs 675 pounds. So it's a little bit of a chore. You can see me struggle with it a little bit. I ended up getting it in there. One thing that I was concerned of the first time I put this on without that intermediate caster, when I drop this saw down in here, is that angle iron just going to buckle and smash my foot. Lucky for me it didn't, but you can see here, slide it on, drop it in, there it goes. Here I am wiggling it a little bit, checking it for stability, and I was a little bit concerned still, but then I remembered we put that table on it, and that's really going to stiffen it up quite a bit. So that's what I go on to next. You see me, I threw that table on there. Now I'm just screwing it to that fence and screwing it down to the table, or to the table saw itself, and that really strengthened up the whole unit. Man, that fence needs some lube. It makes some serious noise. So I throw that level up there again. Not as a level, but as a straight edge, and I'm going to adjust these legs. Once I get it up on those casters, everything was just kind of out of whack, so I had to adjust those legs again. And when I ended up putting them back underneath that outfeed table, I put them in a different spot. I marked it out and actually put some thought into where I wanted them to go. And that's just me just messing around with it. I gotta get them adjusted just right. They still need a little bit of adjustment, but we're working through that. It sure does roll around nice and easy. You see it's got that wiggle in it, and that's those legs. They're not exactly adjusted. They're not up as tight as they could be. And we're just going to keep messing with that to get them just right. Like I mentioned earlier, I changed the location of those legs, so that bottom shelf needed to be trimmed up a little bit. Perfect use for this table saw. Man, I think that's nice. Fits perfect. Roll it out of the way for now. Start working on the second part of this project. That's a Porter cable router, number 7539 if I remember correctly. It's a 3 1/4 horsepower, half-inch collet plunge router. And I'm going to make a base and set this thing down into that table. So here I'm just measuring it up, taking some notes, and then I'll open up my computer, go into Fusion, and start drawing this thing out. So here we are again, back to Fusion, and I'm making this plate where the router will bolt up to it from the bottom, and we'll cut it out in that right outfeed table, and this will be our router table, if you will. Now, I had this set up in my cabinet shop. I had a big, huge bench. This whole operation, the table saw, the router feed, or the router table, everything was built into this big, huge bench. And so this is a little bit different. I'm setting it up a little bit different than I had it in the shop. Trying something new. We'll give it a go, see how it works out. Worst thing, if it doesn't, we can always redo it. That's not a big deal in our shop. We like to try new things and see how they work out. So I got a piece of 1/8" steel loaded up on the table here, and I left this in real time. This is exactly how long it takes the machine to cut this plate out. It's 13 by 13, has a 2 1/2" hole right in the center, and it takes just under 1.5 minutes to cut this whole thing out. It's cutting it at 129 inches a minute. The torch I control, the voltage set on it is 128 volts, I believe. And you can see as the machine goes over it, it goes down and it touches the steel. It actually goes past it. And what is happening is there's a micro switch in that floating head, and it's determining the distance from the tip of the plasma cutter to the top of the steel. So it cuts it at a 0.06 inches off of the steel. And that's what it's doing, as it's going down, touching it, and coming off. We call it touch off. Here I'm using our magnetic clamp on that table to clean up the piece. Now I'd mentioned that it was 13 by 13. This was the first one that I did, and I made it 10 inches by 10 inches, and then I realized that it was too small. Like, it wasn't really going to work out for our application. And you'll see here that as I go and I check out this piece as I'm cleaning it up, the way it worked out good, because this piece is actually bent. It had a warp in it from something, I'm not sure. So we ended up scrapping this piece, and there's the big one. That's 13 by 13. And I went through and just cleaned out the holes real quick. And now I'm countersinking the top of this plate, so those machine screws that the router will be affixed to the bottom of this plate, they'll sit nice and flush on the top. So we're back to the table saw. That's that right outfeed table. And I'm just laying this out there, trying to figure out exactly where I want to put this thing. Once I figure that out, I trace it, mark it out, and then it gets to cutting. Now I had a few options to do this, and I actually contemplated doing them all. One of them, I could have made a template for the router. I could have routed it out. And because this thing needs to sit down in there flush, I was trying to figure out the best way, or the way that I wanted to, may not be the best way, but the way that I wanted to set that plate down in there so it's flush with the rest of the table. So I could have I could have routed out that melamine, that particle board, and left a little step in there for that thing to sit in there nice and neat. And that's kind of what I had on my the bench at my shop, my cabinet shop, and that worked out pretty good. But anytime you got any type of sawdust or anything else underneath there, you had to make sure that thing was super clean. So I wanted to try something different. So what I ended up doing is we just cut this out, and we just made some cleats to put underneath there. So there I got it cut out. That was just a rough cut. So now I'm going to trace it, and I'm going to take my electric file and trim it all the way back to those lines. My uncle always used to tell me you can sand off, but you can't sand back on. And that's some good advice. Something that I always held on to. Because once that material's gone, it's gone forever. You can't replace it. So, like, I took a real fine Sharpie, marked it out to those lines, and now I'm just taking my time, real light pressure, and getting this thing fitted up just right. Here I just took a block with some sandpaper and knocking down all the sharp edges, smoothing everything out. So I'm taking this 2x6 that we had sitting around in the shop, and I'm gonna make these cleats. Now I'll eventually make these out of some sort of hardwood. I'll have to pick up something. We don't have anything laying around. But here I'm measuring the thickness of the material minus the thickness of the material for that plate and figuring out the dimensions to cut these cleats out. And once I cut that cleat out on those long pieces, I'm going to cut it in half and then glue and screw it to the bottom of that outfeed table. Here I'm just trying to figure out where I want to put them. I want to put them on the front and back, the left and right, which is going to work out best for the table to get the router in and out. And there it is all in there. You can see I set it up on the front and back. Now it's time to bolt this router to that plate, drop it down in there, and see how it all fits up. Those are still those temporary cleats, the ones that I just cut out. Once I figure out that this is going to work and this is how I want it, I'll make them out of some oak probably. Now I'm just taking my straight edge, making sure everything's nice and flat and flush. Gonna run that noisy fence over it. And there she is, all put away and ready for the next project. Thanks for watching.